Hey, welcome to the Open House Show. It's your host, Jesse Meadow. We've got a great show for you today. Joining us this week, we have Phil VanDenBrink. He is the Director of University Foundations over at Wasatch Academy, but we're going to be talking to him about his travels around the world and some of the unique opportunities he's had in the enrollment departments and admissions departments in a few different countries and comparing them to the U.S. I think it's going to be a very insightful show, definitely when we talk about cultures and diversity. So let's bring him on without further ado. Hey, Phil, how are you?
Great. It's another beautiful morning in sunny Utah, so
you can't beat it. I'm sure you guys get hammered with some winter weather. So now that you're coming around to the spring, it's probably nice, joyful outside times.
Yeah, I mean, we're still going to the ski. There are 14 ski resorts that are world class here, but there are also 5 national parks. So our kids during our spring break that were on campus got to experience those, and they do every weekend with our recreation as well.
Man, I mean, I know it's not the topic of today, but having a curriculum with some photography and some outdoors things, I mean, that's the place to be. Definitely.
Yeah. I'm lucky to be here. Really, I mean, it fits my personality and my lifestyle of liking the outdoors. So very much.
That's awesome. Ours is mixed. I mean, we have, down here in Florida, we have some great, outdoors things, but at the same time, you've got that mix. You're just driving on the side of the road now that we've got the heat. You see the alligators starting to come out, laying on, sunbathing, getting their temperature regulated and realize, okay, let's not go into that lake. So you got to watch out for some things like that. It's always, keeping your eye out.
No, luckily we don't have too many problems with that here.
Yeah. So, let's get right into it. I know this is an incredibly busy time of year. I appreciate you taking the time. We've got a great topic today. We're going to be basically just listening to some experiences and some stories that you've had and compare, contrast, some things you've learned along the way. A lot of the colleagues that I used to work with and admissions representatives, we visit a lot, especially if we have an international boarding, aspect to our schools. We travel the world looking for students and representing our schools and such. But, as far as living there, working in these schools overseas, that's a very different dynamic that I'm very excited to hear about. So, but before we get started, tell us a little bit about your journey, in education. We talked a little bit before the show. It's quite wide ranging. So kind of bring us up to date to, how everything went and where you are now.
Right. Honestly, a lot of the things that have happened in my lifetime are relevant to the admissions, everybody here. So at Wasatch Academy, I'm the Director of University Foundations, which creates the links and opportunities for students to take college level classes at a boarding school, dual enrollment, convert enrollment. Yep. Many schools have that. I'm also part of the admissions team because I do create these partnerships and I do actually do recruiting as a normal admissions associate as well. So I do have that dual role here. It's as many boarding schools have, you don't just wear one hat, you wear as many that'll fit on your head, sort of a
That's right. That's right. Hey, try this on. Now you get to keep that hat.
Yeah, pretty much. Hey, I have an idea. Great, run with it, but you're doing it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been a great experience throughout that part. And like I said, it fits my lifestyle because here on weekends, I get to go out and actually enjoy the things that the students get to experience as well. So
that's perfect.
So
you traveled around the world a little bit too in beforehand?
Yes. And this is where we get to the admissions process aspects. I was an exchange student through a competitive scholarship I didn't pay a dime for my exchange year in Germany. Awesome. And it was when the internet was first coming around and applications were put online, but you had to print them in those days and actually sign the documents and give documents with it, and recommendation letters had to be actually not handwritten, but typed out.
It's mailed. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it was the same process. You had a difficult application to fill out, recommendation letters, a telephone interview in those days. And then there was an in-person interview that was also part of it that I had to go to a different city that was about 2 hours away to get the group interview and to get the scholarship.
Excellent. Excellent.
And then I'll go a little bit more into my other educational aspects that sparked education in boarding schools and admissions, day schools, independent. It's all about sparking that interest, and that experience for me sparked my interest in international. Now, how did I get into international education with a bachelor's degree in international business, German major, and a French minor? That's an interesting one. I bet a professor and lost.
Okay.
Yeah.
So lost bet turns into a reality career transition.
Yep.
All right.
It was Michigan, 2004. I was the only student that actually passed the Chamber of Commerce exam, which is a French high-level examination. And jobs in Michigan in 2004, the Rust Belt, were a little bit hard for business. And so he called me into his office and he's like, "You're the only one that passed this year, and you've never been anywhere French speaking." I said, "Well, yeah, but so that's the so what." And then he goes, "Well, if I get you a job, or you should go to France." I'm like, "I can't afford your study abroad. I'm looking at no job prospects, adding on a study abroad that are quite expensive."
Right.
And he goes, "Well, if I get you a job in France, will you go?" And he said, and I said yes, but he made me shake, and that's where that's when I actually became a international teacher, teaching business English to adults in France.
That's excellent.
Then the next question is, how did I get to Utah from Paris, France?
Yeah.
Mount Pleasant, Utah. Adapt. That's what that's the most important part of anybody's life, is adapt. I put my resume out because it was a 1-year young professionals visa. That's all I had. And I wasn't really interested in staying because Paris is beautiful. It's nice, but it doesn't have the lifestyle I want. It doesn't have the skiing that's close nearby, the hiking, things like that. And this boarding school in Utah contacted me, and then they needed somebody who spoke French, which Utah, a lot of Spanish speakers, but very few, French speakers for what they were looking for. And I had a call on a Friday night, which is an odd time to call a 22, 23-year-old at that point, and had to step out of the cafe. And I had an interview on the street on a street in Paris. And 3 weeks later, I was on a plane to Mount Pleasant, Utah, and it was definitely a transformational experience that I don't regret. And it has just been phenomenal since. This school has the international vibrancy and everything that I enjoyed. And teaching here, you really get to know the students. And that might sound sales pitchy, but it's actually true. And then no good deed goes unpunished. Then 4 years later, I was asked to start our partnership programs in China.
Okay.
And I was there for 5 years. Then I wanted to branch out, and I tried a boarding school in Switzerland. Then I was a head of school in the United States for 2 more years before I came back here to where I enjoy the outdoors and all the adventures you can have here in Mount Pleasant.
No, it's a perfect story. You go out, you try some new things, especially when you're talking over different countries, not even like different areas of the same city, and then you come home. And now you are where you are, and that's great. So kind of transitioning a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Wasatch, and plug the school a little bit before we get into those content pieces, and talk a little bit about your travels.
Yeah. Well, Wasatch Academy has been here since 1875. It is the oldest high school in Utah, and it's the only non-therapeutic independent boarding school in the state as well.
Okay.
So it's in a unique position, and we're surrounded by national parks, ski resorts. We have our own equine program. We have our own ski cabin 15 minutes from campus. We have a skate park designed by Tony Hawk's team. We have 3 gyms, a swimming pool, brand new engineering building. Our art center people should really click on the virtual tour of our school. The art center is a former car dealership, so it's got that big industrial feel, but fully renovated and repurposed for what we need. Our music conservatory was once the church that was attached to the school, but had since gone their separate ways, and we sort of brought that back as a conservatory. We're a non-religious school, but we wanted to keep that history, that vibrancy, and fully renovated.
That's a good space. Usually, churches, whether you're religious or not, they're usually great buildings, great facilities, great spaces to use for things just like this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful building. We kept the stained glass windows. I mean,
perfect.
What what better experience for that spirituality of music than to have stained glass windows in your recital hall? I mean, that's just a beautiful.
Absolutely.
And we have international students and domestic, more domestic, of course. And one aspect that really is attracting people this year in particular is our learning center. As we know, the online learning has students struggling, to say the least.
Absolutely.
And our learning center, we actually expanded it this year. And
awesome.
The adaptability of our school too. We did hire another therapist this year for the same reason. Anxiety is on the rise, as we know from the pandemic, of that constant fear, and students need that outlet. So we've really adapted to that as well.
And it's key. I mean, social emotional learning was a huge topic that's been rising no matter where you are, public, private, and throughout the past few years. This pandemic has really, ignited that into high gear. I mean, you're talking kids that were completely taken away during, times in their lives when they're trying to get grips with everything, and now their friends are gone and they don't have a normal routine, and I got to adapt to this new learning environment, and and everything that goes along with that. They had enough stresses already, and now you throw all this onto it. What does this mean for my future? Am I losing a year? How does this work on college? Forget it. Those types of investments that schools are making on that social emotional side are not going to go to waste this year. That's for sure. Any year really. So
no. Yeah. And our advisory program, we're actually focusing more on the student needs and adapting to the current environment. Same with our dormitory. I mean, we have full-time dorm parents for a reason. It's to make sure they're emotionally available for the students as well, because I couldn't imagine being a teacher where you're a teacher, a dorm parent, coach, and everything. That's really tough, especially this year, because they also have their own family concerns. And
correct.
We're actually doing things with the staff more this year as well, to have that nurturing, caring environment, because the staff are the key point of actually making that normalcy occur.
Correct. Yeah, it's a key role that everyone's got their roles to play, and that sense of normalcy, or at least that sense of or giving that comfort level to the campus. It's going to be key. It's going to start with the adults and filter on down from there. So no matter what your roles are on campus, that's great. Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, let's get into it. I know you spent some time in China. I know we talked about your time in Switzerland, but starting off, what was the admissions experience, through your eyes, obviously, in China? How did the processes work? What were some of the things that you kind of experienced in that enrollment season in China at a school there?
Yeah, the school I worked for was one of the top in the country. As a matter of fact, one of the secretaries of education, there are only 2 in the nation that are still principals of schools. We were one of the 2 in the nation where the principal of our school, or the head of school, was also a national secretary of education. So this was one of the flagship schools in China for innovation. Even to apply to the school, you had to be in the top 5% of the high school admissions test. That's just to even get an application in. And then we had 600-700 kids getting that application, making that application level. And then we only have spots for about 100 of them. So they've already gone through, they filtered the applications out, the people that get the students that get the interviews, only about 700. And you will have parents waiting outside the school gate the entire day wondering if their child had actually made it into your school. Now, this was for the international program. The domestic Chinese program was just as intense. Wow. So this is just for the international. This was about maybe 3,000-4,000 student school in total. And the international department, the part where I was part of, and the associate director, we could only bring in about 100 per year.
Jeez.
Yeah.
How did that vetting process work? I mean, obviously, you were limited on who could apply, and then when you get that number, how does that all play out?
Yeah, we had 5 minutes to interview a child that's placing all their hopes and dreams in your school. We had 5 minutes with each student. And in that short amount of time, you had to make a split-second decision and sort of take the emotion of their hopes out, which sounds a little robotic, but you have to make a decision. and you have to make a split-second decision. It could come down to a student pausing too long to respond. That's how quick you had to make a decision, because you don't have time to get to know the student. You have a set limited number of questions, you rank them, and then you put a final, do you believe they would fit or not? So you had to rank the questions on a scale, like a Likert scale from 1 to 5, and then you had to circle at the bottom if you think they'd be a good fit. And even if they were a good fit that you thought they were, there may have been students with higher points that would have actually gotten the admissions, even if you had, like, let's say 200 out of the 700 you thought would fit. You had to still eliminate another 100 of them, and they would just be basically based on interview points at that point.
Wow.
So it was a totally different experience from any admissions that I've ever dealt with, because Beijing is a major city. I mean, there are, I think, 27 million people in the general area. Count up everyone, and it's intense. I mean, the culture is intense, and the school admissions process was intense as well. And you see they would tell students quickly so that they could have another opportunity to try another school. And so you kind of saw kids with their parents outside the gate afterwards, and we'd always stay inside in case there were emotional.
No, yeah, for sure. You let them deal with that outside, and you hear stories, and you talk about like testing. Like what did you get on that test? The national exams, and where that the opportunities that's afforded to you because of that, and how much pressure is built up. You can only imagine. You actually get the grade you're wanting on that test, and now we've got to go through this process of elimination on an interview side where it's only 5 minutes to show myself, and what can I possibly show, and the pressure that goes along with that. And, you have a family behind you that's so involved that they're waiting outside to find out the news, all day. And that's another added pressure, because you don't want to let them down, much less I want to go for myself. That's tough on a kid. That's a tough process.
Oh, yeah. For sure. And you have to remain as objective as possible too. I mean, that was probably the toughest day to actually work in the school. Was the interview day, not the application day, nothing. The interview day was the most emotionally draining for people that were on my side.
Oh, yeah. Well. No, I mean, the numbers that you're talking about, you're looking at like an all day. You can't have an off day on that day. You're going to have a lot going on. You're going to have a lot of intensity and attention to detail the whole day. You don't want to slack off from one interview and now that kid's whole life has changed because you were tired. And it's intense. That's a big process, and it's very much, we talked a little bit about it before, but it very much feels like more of a an assembly line, and it's like here's the things, and here's the next step, here's the next step, here's the next step. Okay, we're done, and then everyone moves on with life, and it's like, okay, that was a little impersonal, but that's the process there. How did you feel it compared? Let's jump to Switzerland. You go west more, and now we're in Europe, the most expensive schools in the world, where I imagine in the Alps, beautiful areas. What was this experience like?
That experience is, I would say, the American experience mixes a little of the Chinese experience with a little bit of the Swiss experience. The Swiss experience is very much personalized, to the point where, the schools are $100K plus per year. And of course, the cost of living there is much more extreme than in the United States. But we would actually have admissions officers in the region, so they could go to the events that the parents would be at and form those relationships. They'd be invited by other parents to really build that one-on-one personalization. The admissions team was large, but it needed to be to create that one-on-one experience that many boarding schools now do here. They were attracting royalty, high-powered business people. It was a different demographic, and the parents wanted to make sure that their child would be cared for. So they really wanted to make sure that admissions person they could trust, because they were the go-to. They were the person that could speak their language, literally.
Yeah.
And it was the attraction, the process of attaining a new student took a lot longer. In China, it was test, interview, answer. But in China or in Switzerland, it might be they're in their home country, they see them at an event, they talk about the school 2 years before.
Yeah.
3 years. They've known them. They're almost like a friend or a confidant that they can work with. And
so so basically you're explaining, there's paid staff admissions representatives of the school, but they're all over, Europe, I would imagine, mainly in different main city hubs, going to events or things that, current families or alumni families might have invited them to, so that they can network essentially with prospective families and prospective wealthy families that are at these events, to get them to come to the school. And that's how they form those relationships.
Now, Switzerland, much like Wasatch Academy, doesn't have a local base. Even European, yes, there are European admissions people, but there might be somebody in Moscow or St. Petersburg. There might be somebody in Bahrain. There might be somebody in Shanghai. There might be somebody in Sao Paulo.
Gotcha.
There might be somebody in Santiago, Chile. It was pretty much like an American boarding school that attracts from all over as well. So that's kind of a similarity. It's just that our budgets are a little bit tighter than the budgets where they charge 100,000 plus.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, the I guess the angle of getting the families and the type of families that you're getting, are totally different too. I mean, you go. I don't want to make a terrible analogy, but when you go fishing, depending on what the type of fish is, that's how you have to plan your whole bait trip. And if these huge royalty, aristocracy and these large wealthy families are my goal, I'm going to have to treat that and handle that much differently and go at it differently than I would, just a student, or even especially if a local student in the U.S., how I would go and attain those kind of families and reach out to them and build those relationships. It seems more of that is done on the U.S. side, kind of as they become a student and then during their whole process as a student, not so much beforehand. I know my experience with admissions, we would meet families. It would be relatively quick for the most part. It depends on which family, but sometimes a few weeks or a few months. And then as they came in and you met them through matriculation, the students were there and they asked for updates, and, you go visit the country, you go stop by, say hello. That's when we built those relationships. It was kind of during their tenure at the school, where in Switzerland, you're kind of explaining that all that's kind of done beforehand.
Yeah, very much. That trust is built prior to enrollment. And it's a different experience, but we'll get to this later, but there are a lot of similarities and things you can pull from each different experience that actually has made my career path more fruitful when speaking to families.
That's good. Let's talk about that. Let's how did those experiences compare, maybe altogether or individually to, the U.S. system, or what you've experienced, around your travels in the U.S.?
Right. Well, the Wasatch Academy experience, most boarding schools, from what I've read, pull from usually 160-mile radius, the majority of their population. Okay. Utah's a lower population. We don't do that. We've always pulled from we have a much wider net, let's say, going back to your fishing analogy. But, when the student is in the school, that is also important for the retention aspect, because it's better to keep students than to continually have that revolving door. Correct. So that personalization is the same in all three. Even the Chinese school, students would stay there, but the parents wanted to feel that their child was cared for and help them to reach their goals, which were usually Ivy League schools. But that retention and that key of nurturing helps the school rank in China, and also helps the word of mouth in the United States or in Switzerland, because people talk about their children. Yeah. That is the same no matter where you are. People are proud of their children and want their children to have a wonderful experience. So all three are the same. Yes, in the United States, we have testing requirements. Wasatch Academy, we do our own internal testing, and our process is a little different. But I have not met a boarding school that doesn't have an interview. And I have not met an admissions rep that, when they have to say no to a family, doesn't sort of feel that sadness a little bit as well. Yeah. That is the same across the board. But that personalization and adaptability, even currently, that is key as well. Like, you have to adapt. Everybody's had to adapt to making sure that nurturing and that care and concern have been going on this year, especially because everybody, I mean, every boarding school, at least fourth quarter last year, pretty much around the globe went online.
Right.
And maintaining those relationships and maintaining that adaptability that's key was even tested further. But we also got to learn from it. But going back to the admissions experience, everybody has an application, everybody has an interview, but the more important part is everybody has to have that personal touch with the families.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you create that trust from the very start? And usually it's getting to know the student and making sure that you can be honest and upfront with what they're looking for, because you want to make sure whatever you're saying you can actually deliver upon, because that integrity and honesty, that comparison is the same no matter where you are. Be honest, be ethical, and make sure that you're working with families in a direct manner, and making sure that they're the right fit for what you offer.
Absolutely. Do you think that there's, some cultural, things that kind of go into how those processes work? For example, testing is such a big deal. Definitely in China. I know in France, testing. My cousins, when they had to do their test, it was like the most stressful thing in their life. It shows everything of what they're able to do from that point forward. So I know it's not really just it's not really just here or there. Majority of the places, testing is such a huge deal. Where here we take into account so many other things. Do you think that's a cultural thing, or there are cultural influences there?
Yes, and this is why I came back to the United States. Even though China did not have, our program was more focused on AP, so It was still that testing. But I believe education is going through a shift. We're starting to see that high stakes testing really proves that you can take a high stakes test. It doesn't prove that you can adapt and you're ready for the 21st century. Most of our lives, it's gone from A, B, C, D answers to here's a problem, how do you solve that problem? For example, here at Wasatch Academy, we do project-based learning, which allows the student to adapt to their skill set. And that's something that's very much American. I mean, the Swiss school had the International Baccalaureate, which is pretty much, yes, I am trained in it. Yes, I understand it, but it's still a high stakes test. It's still a pressure cooker. It's still, we jokingly called it the meat grinder for students, because you have to work so hard and you feel that you don't have time for other things. Whereas in the US experience, we want to create that cultural aspect. Real business is done on the golf course. That's anecdotal and it's but it's true. We want to teach kids in the United States how to understand people. It's almost as if solving the problem in the United States is more focused on EQ, and IQ is important, but it may not be as important as the EQ, getting that social emotional help, being able to talk to people that are from different cultures. Not the test score that's going to make you successful in life. As a matter of fact, many of the most wealthiest people on the planet might not have finished university. And as a college prep boarding school, I'll never say that, but
college is important. But so are ideas.
So are the ideas. And the world, I mean, as we've seen this past year, it's crazy how quickly it adapts. Who would have thought 20 years ago that Amazon would have been as important as it was this year? Getting your supplies, your needs, your groceries, things that didn't exist 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's
not even 20. I mean, I get groceries delivered. We actually at the boarding school, I used to work at, we had to have this whole conversation around, what are we going to allow the kids to order, because they could literally get anything dropped off at the dorms, and when are those hours, and when is it appropriate, and where's the limits here, and those are conversations that didn't happen 5-10 years ago, because it just wasn't available to them. And now, they can get Starbucks, they got smoothies, just especially if you have the resources that and don't care about those fees, you can get anything delivered to the campus, or more broadly speaking, to your home.
Right.
Those are things that didn't exist before. It's forever changing, and every year it gets quicker and quicker. But how can a test keep up with that?
Right.
And that's a good point that you're making there.
And here with our learning center, as an admissions person, we also have to adapt. I need to learn more about testing and learning, like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. We need to learn those things as well as the cultural component, because in the United States, we care more about the person. I mean, I shouldn't say it like that. Everyone cares about the person, but just because they have a learning difference does not mean they won't be successful. And working with that cultural component, that's a key part of the United States. It's a difference in Switzerland.
Where elsewhere that they might be less likely to get in, really.
Yep. They want the high test score.
Yeah.
Internationally, in my opinion, and I'm working on a PhD in international education. So while I don't have the PhD yet, I can speak with a little bit of authority. Outside of the United States, the testing is almost more important than the experience of the student or learning how to problem solve if you have a learning difference. Because
sure.
Like you're talking about Le Bac in France, well, only a certain percentage of students even get to try that in high school. Many of the others might be in a different type of educational setting, whereas the United States is more egalitarian with what we provide for students. So if you struggle, here are the services that will help you to overcome the struggle and help you to adapt.
Yeah. Culturally, sticking on this subject, when we talk about, family interactions, admissions processes of how we reach out, and, not so much market, but really interact with families, I guess you would say, through the application process, through the outreach process. Are there some cultural differences there? I mean, I know that the principle is the same, but, the end result, but how we get there, how does culture influence that?
I would say in terms of the admissions process, in China, I did not know anything about the parents. The parents, their background, where they worked, nothing. It was just test scores with the initial application interview. Switzerland and the United States, you get to learn the family culture.
Yeah.
Even in Switzerland, I shouldn't probably say this, but my office did have a liquor cabinet locked, but it did have, because culturally you have, when they're coming in to visit these expensive schools, the Russian parent might want to drink some vodka. I would not, while working, and I would tell them, hey, I'm sticking with coffee because I have my job to do. Or the parents may want a glass of wine, or the Germans may want a beer, whatever. We would try to adapt that way. Now in the United States, we don't do that, and we do not do that here. I want to point that out. We do not do that at But
there's a liquor cabinet, but the parents cannot get into it. I'm just joking.
I just don't want people to be concerned about what we do here.
No,
But I've had parents come in. I'm like, oh, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. You want another one? Okay. But that was the culture of Europe. It was a much different experience. But getting to know the families was important in Switzerland and in the United States, because again, we want to know what are their goals for education. The school I worked at in Switzerland had that as a target. Where do you want your child to go for college? And we have that same goal, but we need to talk to the parents to make sure they're open with us and have those. When they come to Wasatch Academy, I will take them to a local coffee shop or a school coffee shop even. We have a nice little coffee shop on campus. So I will take them there and help them to let their guard down, to understand personally, why do you want your child here? And our demographics are different, because they're coming mostly from out of state. So are they in a rural location without very many opportunities for their child? Or is it a Zoom where they're in a major city where they want more safety? Like I said, here's an anecdotal story. One of my colleagues, her neighbor will take out her garbage in the morning and put the garbage can back for her every single Monday, just to be neighborly. I have another, my neighbors where I live, we take turns shoveling each other's sidewalks on snowy mornings.
Wow.
And it's just whoever's up first.
Yeah.
And I try not to be the last one awake all the time, but
yeah, exactly. Well, if it makes any consolation, down here, when I'm blowing my driveway from the leaves that are falling or the pollen that might be out right now, we don't really have snow.
Right.
I'll go ahead and do my neighbor's driveway too.
Yep. Yeah. It's
Much easier than shoveling snow though, and which is why I love living here.
yeah.
Just blowing some leaves around, you can't beat that. But no,
Well,
I get that personalization, that community feel, and we talked about this on the show before. Like independent schools are blessed to, they all have their separate missions,
Right.
but at least in the U.S., there is a centralized focus on community unity. Having the school community as a whole, making sure that the values are aligned. With the families. And, it was an excellent point. When we used to travel, we'd have all these different types of schools in one room. And, you would talk to families and really it was, are we a good fit for you?
Right.
And vice versa. Are you a good fit for us? But sometimes the parents don't align. And then what are you really bringing in? You're bringing in an issue. And one that you have to weigh the pros and cons of if this is even worth it.
Yeah.
They might do better somewhere else, and that's okay. We're not for everyone. I would imagine anyone that's looking for the bright lights of New York City, they're not going to want to go to Utah's not going to be a good fit the same way Florida wouldn't be a good fit. You want that urban feel. So
yeah, if you're looking for the outdoor experience, we get a lot of students from the Bay Area and San Francisco. That's one of our key. If you're looking at cities, those are two of the main key because their students are in a safe environment. Our school has, the key cards and all the safety. We have cameras outside, but essentially that's more for the parents because
correct.
I know about half my friends probably don't lock their cars at night out in the driveway or lock their house doors even when they're gone for work. Now, I have to be careful with that one too because
we're gonna Google your address.
Yeah, I know the way my address is, but it's a different experience here, even from where I grew up in the United States. It's a totally different experience, and it's good. I mean, if you want to come here, the outdoors. If you want to sit in your dorm room and play video games, you're not going to have the full experience here.
Sure.
And that's what I look for in the admissions process too, to make sure that the students understand what we offer here and to make sure they're excited about it as well.
Right. When you're talking about processes, we've talked a little bit about that, how they were in China, and it was kind of more of a manufacturing place. And then you go to Switzerland, it was very personalized and it's very, outreach everywhere around the globe, pulling in families. In the U.S., everyone's pretty familiar with the U.S., but were there any processes or strategies that were implemented, overseas in your experience, maybe even as a student in France, or your first job in France, a student in Germany, something that you said, hey, this is a good idea. Let's bring this back. Or when you got your position here in the States, you used this because you knew that it was an idea. Were there any things like that takeaways that you kind of brought in?
Yes. The connection of connecting current families with prospective families. That was a part of Switzerland, and that is something that we definitely do here, because that connection, it almost creates a friendship between the families. And if the parents enjoy their experience here, they'll talk openly with students. And again, tours, student-led, I don't even go on them here. Now that is a little bit different from Switzerland because it was almost more protected, but
yeah. That makes sense. You might be worried about what a student might say about some of their classmates in one of those schools, but yeah.
Yes. Here, it's about that connection with current families and making sure that prospective families can almost imagine their child. So matching them up with the right people, that maybe their child has ADHD, while connecting them with a parent of a student that has ADHD. And of course, you have to ask the parents if you can share this with them. And
right, of course, yeah.
I mean, all the legal aspects of it. So I don't share anything that if families don't want that shared. But usually, if they're in our learning services program, they're more than happy because we do that very personalized approach here. And then, again, making those parent events. We're a boarding school where most people aren't local. So scheduling those times well in advance. We did that in Switzerland a year in advance. We'd have that school calendar out with, there it was family ski week basically, because we were in the Alps. I mean, but here we're in, well, actually it's very similar to Utah because we also have it in winter. So 3 times a year, families often would come to campus, beginning of year, family winter week, and end of year. And that was the same in Switzerland, and it's the same here. And making sure there are parent events for each of those is important because the students are excited. They want to meet their peers. Well, so do the parents.
Right.
They want to meet other parents that might be new or may have been here, and to talk about their experiences and share their experiences, and allowing those platforms and those times when they can get together. Now, one thing that has, and I'm not sure if I'm skipping ahead, but making sure even during this current crisis, we've also done some things with that, and that'll be a little teaser for when we get a little bit further along.
Okay. Yeah. Well, no, that you can go right ahead. I mean, the biggest things, we've got coming up, is a lot of the takeaways. So, that kind of goes with the flow of things. I do find it interesting because I've heard a lot of schools starting to do this, where they're matching up current families. I know at my alma mater, we used to have complete student-led tours as well. They would go out, you'd meet in the admissions office with the admissions representative. They'd introduce the student. They'd go out on the tour. They'd come back, and then you'd answer any questions that, usually financial things that the students don't have answers for, and things of that nature. And that's very helpful. It makes them feel comfortable. And we would match up, if it was a Brazilian family, we had a Brazilian student. If it was a Chinese family, we had some Chinese students that would help out, give them that personal connection. But the parents, matching the parents up together, is something that's really starting to catch fire and is really starting to get a huge benefit for a lot of schools. It's word of mouth advertising. I know it's not directly because that's not how they came to you, but that's how you're going to, if you want to say close the deal, it is this word of mouth experience, a personal experience. And especially if you're able to link them up by interest or, learning situation or nationality or whatever the commonality would be, that would really boost that experience. And definitely if they're looking at 2 or 3 different schools, really puts you in the front running of they're comfortable now. I know what the experience will be like. I know what the experience should be like specifically for my kid. And that mystery is gone. Now I feel comfortable. I already know somebody there. My son, daughter already knows somebody there. That whole comfortability comes into play too. And when they're starting to make those decisions on where to go, I'd be shocked if this has not become more prevalent, nationwide here in the States, if it's not already.
Right. And you're right. I mean, everybody has marketing materials. Everybody has a marketing person, and every school looks wonderful in marketing. And the difference is, what does the school focus on? That's not really in the marketing materials as much. Sure, you have signature programs.
Right.
But you want to talk to somebody who's experienced it from the same perspective. And that is, you're right. If schools want to make that connection with prospective families, start connecting them with some parents that you can go to, your key parents that love the school and would like to speak about similar situations, to make sure that it is a fit for the family. Because essentially, you're not enrolling a student, you're enrolling a family.
Yeah, definitely.
Is,
I mean, in my role in admissions, that is absolutely true. And in my role when I was running the residential department, man, is that the truth. Like, there's sometimes I would hear more from the parents than I would from the kids themselves about what's going on.
And that's true. And that's one thing, aspect that I learned from Switzerland that I brought back here. And it was actually solidified here. In China, it's not quite that way because of the mass number of people wanting to get. But parents do talk in China as well. I mean, the social media of parents talking about schools and things like that exists, but it's not as primary as in a Swiss boarding school or an American boarding school.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the testing is going to be so huge, but if you're not hooked up with WeChat for those Chinese families, you're going to be missed out on.
Yeah, and that's one thing. That's a big difference from when I applied and you applied to boarding school. You have that there are so many different platforms now, and actually starting to share those even on your website. These are our social media platforms for updates on the basis, because that'll put the hook out, but actually starting to bring the prospective families into your school, that's where the connection with other families is important.
Correct. Yeah. And easy to facilitate, if you were wanting to. So,
yeah.
So, you traveled abroad, studied abroad, education background, going to school about abroad education. What were some of your biggest takeaways from your travel? Some, things that you're utilizing now, not so much processes, maybe even ways of thinking, but what were some of your biggest takeaways from your travels?
I would say number one, a smile is universal. Because even when I lived in Germany, when I first moved there as a student, sometimes I had no idea what they were saying, and I just smile and nod. But creating that warmth, that smile creates that personal connection from the very start. Number one word to learn when you're going to any country, or even in the United States, say thank you at some part during the conversation to the family, because they're trusting you. So saying thank you for trusting me, that's important. I don't care where you are.
Yeah.
Then another key point is adapt. Adapt. And that is, and every situation, even this year, was stressful, but adapting was the key. For example, use the tools that are becoming more popular. Even after COVID, our school is still going to continue every 3 weeks, we have a parent Zoom with a focus point and then a Q&A session so they can ask questions. So the topic might be residential life, but maybe the parent has a question about, let's say, when are the AP tests, or how are AP tests being administered this year? So you're talking about recreation, you're talking about residential life, but make sure to answer the other parents' questions and open that up, because 3 times a year, when you're trusting your child with a school, is not enough.
Right.
And yes, of course, we have conferences. Yes, they can email us, but they want to be invited as well. And having these open Zoom sessions for parents to participate in creates a community of people. It creates a literal global community, because we have parents logging on from China, the United States, South America, Europe, everywhere for these events. And adapt your times as well to make sure that you're at 3 a.m. for this person every single time. Adapt your time throughout your school day, or maybe even making it in the evening, like we've done that a few times, to make sure we can hit every time zone that we're involved with.
No, that makes total sense. And then you're only going to be getting the families that really want to participate in that, so that it's going to make that whole event so much stronger as far as content and interaction.
Yes, very, very, very much. Yes. So, those are the main aspects of travel. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know, as an admissions person. Often you don't want to say that, but make sure to follow it up with, I don't know, but I will find the answer out for you and I will get back to you quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. The smiling is always a good one. You try to be pleasant. I remember when I would visit my cousins, I'd be in Paris, I'd be walking around, everyone's got their headphones in, they're so focused. You smile and say hello, you're from out of town. And that might be a lot of a big city rather than a rural community. I might have had a different experience out there, but it was always funny. Depending on where you went, the interactions you had with the general public. I'd go to Mexico, everyone's the nicest person you could ever imagine. Ecuador, same thing. And then, you go to Russia, I'm in Moscow, and, until they get to know you, it's cold, stone cold, and then you see them enjoying their time and laughing. But with you, it's like, who are you? I don't know you. So I'm cold and emotionless, Yeah,
that's true of the adaptability part. Even in China, it's that way. Yeah. Similar aspect, but when you're asking for something, that's when you smile. Like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm really lost. Can you please help me?
Right.
And because I've probably been lost in more countries than I can even remember at this point. And that smile and that warmth, trying to give off that presence.
Yeah.
Important in admissions, and it's important in life. And don't be afraid of learning about that other person on a personal level. that it doesn't matter where you are, getting that personal connection with that family, that'll make or break your experience as an admissions individual.
Absolutely. That's a great point to end that segment on. I think, there was a ton of insights learned there, but, regionally, we always like to talk about what's going on in the region. First Utah school that we've had on the show, so how, we talked a little bit about how the pandemic has affected or not affected, especially with some outdoor activities and things of this nature. But what is enrollment looking like these days, over in Utah?
Well, we've always had a larger net, I would say. I don't like to use the word net with people, but
I know what you mean, like a reach.
Yeah, our reach is far, and we're actually getting a lot of phone calls. This is the typical phone call from a parent coming from certain states. Hi, I'm really worried about my child. They're not doing very well online. And I'll say, whoa, hold on. I hate to tell you this, but your child is not unique.
Yeah.
And what? I said, don't worry. That's what we're here for. That's why we have our learning services program. That's why we're in person. And I say, yeah, but I just don't understand my child. They're just not learning. I said, okay, you've probably done a Netflix binge, right? Well, yes. I said, okay, now imagine doing a Netflix binge Monday through Friday with a TV show you really don't want to watch, with actors who may have had a little bit of training, but they're not very well experienced.
Yeah.
That's what your children are going through at this time. Zoom classrooms are essentially, they're being forced to Netflix binge 7 hours a day, 5 days a week with a TV show they don't want to watch. I mean, I've done online learning. I do online learning, and I have professors that are great with video, but I have professors that struggle. And that is one of the things that people are really looking for, is to make sure that they have that reassurance that you will be open, you will be safe. Luckily, I'm in Utah. We've been ahead of the curve. Anybody over the age of 16 can get the vaccine here. We've been open all year. We have the outdoor experience. We're a lower population state, which, in previous years might have been an issue, but this year, oh yes. I mean, we have 14 ski resorts, 5 national parks, and a lot of state parks minutes away from our campus. So we've had a robust weekend experience. We rent out the movie theater. We actually did an axe throwing, which was very popular. We had to do it 2 nights in a row. We rented out the axe throwing facility. And yes, of course, with safety, we had adults there watching to make sure the kids were not doing anything crazy. But even the haunted house, that was a very popular experience. We rented out the entire experience for our students, and they could go. So that's part of Utah. Those are some of the unique experiences. We've been open uninterrupted all year. And we've actually had a parent that valued our education so much, they donated all the supplies. So we're a CLIA certified testing center for COVID. And we've had 625 tests since January 25th, all negative. And those are unique aspects of our school that are really hard to replicate sometimes.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's going to be unique opportunities in an enrollment season, depending on where, and in situations like this. Look, you can even say this in industry. Not every industry was able to benefit from the pandemic. There are some industries, like you were saying with Amazon.
Yep.
They absolutely benefited. They were in a position to, and it's just how it goes sometimes. Some things benefit you, some things don't, and in this case, I would imagine an outdoor school that's been in, one, has a focus on learning support anyways, has done a good job with being online, but is also in person. And not only that, it's not just school. You can also have experiences outside of school where most of the country can't. Those should be huge draws for families if they're able to know about it.
And we're not downplaying any aspect of the pandemic. We actually hired another therapist this year.
Yeah.
And students can drop by that office, because let's face it, whenever you read the news, you're worried about your family. My family's out of state. I worry about them. Their COVID numbers are up, or they're down or whatever. This anxiety is impacting students.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to have the amount of support we have for students with our advisory, our dormitory, but having that professional that is trained in, I would almost call it a traumatic experience, or the high anxiety that students are facing this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's key. I mean,
well, and having those professionals too, that it's their job, it's their role to stay up to date with these things. So, maybe they didn't have formal pandemic training before. Well, now there's some professional development stuff coming out that you're staying on top of as your role, as your profession, that you're able to relay, an effective way to, students and families, both. I would imagine you can get some of that stuff. That's great.
Oh,
excellent. What about, we always like to close, what do you think is going to be your biggest opportunity? Like to leave on a high note.
Yep. In-person learning. I mean, we all thought the trend was moving towards independent online learning, but we're realizing that human to human interaction, that is still important. And that's where boarding schools and independent day schools will continue to thrive if they focus on that in-person learning and the in-person experience.
Sure.
And it's not only the classroom, it's the outside of it. So can the students do things beyond the school day? And we've had that throughout this school year. That is the number one thing people are calling. Are you in person? And do you have more than just the academics?
Sure.
The academics are important. We're a full college prep school, but do you have the supports available? So I say, yes, we have 3 therapists. We have a nationally known learning center. We've actually hired more people in our learning center to help catch students back up to grade level. And they are trained. Our learning coaches are there. They will also be an empathetic ear if the student's struggling with anxiety. Maybe grandma got COVID or something, And when we went for spring break a couple of weeks ago, the parents, the number one place they would actually go when they were picking up their child was our learning center.
Oh, nice. That's the most crucial piece. How are my kids learning? How are they able to? What are we doing here to support that learning process? Because that's at the end of the day, the experience is great. It's an added bonus, but it's the education that's the core around all of that. How are we adapting?
Sorry to interrupt. Our learning coaches also focus on the social emotional health.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they will write that. I mean, and they also communicate with families. They'll share their cell phone numbers. And of course I do, but I work in admissions. But having learning coaches that will, or advisors that will, or dorm parents that will, that biggest opportunity is focus on your in-person and how you're doing it safely, of course, which we still have masking, and we're actually probably going to start offering, I say probably, if families want to discuss it, we're actually encouraging them to discuss if they want their child to have the vaccine.
Okay.
We're 16 plus now in the state of Utah, but of course we have to have the parents sign off on it.
Right.
And the reassurance with families, you're almost in admissions, you're talking to the family and reassuring them more than ever before. They're going to ask you the tough safety questions, like, what's your policy on mask mandates? What is your cleaning protocol? I mean, how often are rooms sanitized? Those are the questions that admissions officers across the United States, I believe, are getting, because those are the questions I'm receiving.
Absolutely.
And how can you help my child go back to grade level or achieve their grade level proficiency? That's another aspect of an opportunity to speak to families.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a great insights. Phil, we've covered quite a distance in travel here and in different processes. I really appreciate you coming on during this busy time of year and giving us some insights and comparing some of your experiences with how things are done here. I've definitely taken some things to use in my daily life from those travels experience. So I really appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. The opportunity to speak about, everything that's going on.
Absolutely. All right. Well, have a great rest of the week. I really appreciate you coming on, and best of luck this enrollment season.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity again, and Have a great day as well.
You too. See you later. That'll do it for us this week. I hope you enjoyed the show. As always, you can catch us at schoolcrafteddigital.com. We have this episode plus all of the others from season 1. You can catch us on our YouTube channel and all of our social sites, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the week. Bye.